So with that, it is 12:02. So let me call the September 15th, 2022 SFO Airport Community Roundtable Legislative Subcommittee, that's a mouthful, to order. And I want to welcome and thank all of you for being here this afternoon. We have a scheduled time for an hour and a half, I believe, if I'm not incorrect. And we have about 4 or 5 different topic items we'd like to get to today. But before we get into it, I'd like to introduce our guests who are joining us today. And our staff. And Kathleen Wentworth, our roundtable coordinator. Kathleen is with us. Angela Montiz, our roundtable administrative secretary, and Tim Middleton, our aviation technical consultant for HMMH. And Kathleen, do we have any other guests present today or staff present?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Planning Department Deputy Director Lisa Ayazosa. And yes, and also Congresswoman Jackie Spears, Senior Policy Advisor, Brian Perkins.
Hello, Brian. Welcome. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us today. So with that, we'll now proceed to a roll call. Kathleen, if you could please take the roll.
Chair Royce.
Present.
Member Schneider.
Present.
And Member Di Giovanni.
Present.
And we have a quorum.
Great. Let the record reflect as such. So thank you all for being here today. And I know some of you are without technical tools, so we appreciate you joining us today.
Chair.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. If under panelists, I see Bert, and I think maybe Linda's getting transferred over. They're under the attendees file.
Yes, thank you, Member Schneider.
I know Angela always catches it.
Thank you. I have attempted to promote Bert. Oh, there he is. So yes, Linda Wolin also did join us. Thank you.
And Bert Ganong.
And Bert Ganong. Okay, Linda and Bert, welcome as well.
And we should also acknowledge our panelist, Emily Tranter, is here, but you'll be introducing her later.
I will. Thank you very much. Okay. So with that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is public comment on items not on the agenda. These are items, again, that we've not covered, and this gives you an opportunity to speak to those. And I will turn over to Ms. Montiz to walk through the how you may participate for the public comment. So Angela.
Thank you, Chairman Royce. For those attending the meeting on the Zoom video conference, we will use the raised hand feature in order to organize any public comments. During the general public comment periods, I will ask those members of the public who wish to comment to click the raised hand feature to speak on that agenda item. For those joining by phone, please press *9 to indicate your desire to speak, and then *6 to unmute your microphone. When you hear your names called, we will prompt you and inform you that you may begin speaking. You will have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Before we take public comment, do we have any written comments on non-agenda items?
Staff did not receive any written public comments, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
And pardon me, something is wrong with my stopwatch, so I'm not able to pull that up, but I will be keeping the 2 minutes on my end and inform our speakers when their time is up. And right now I do see Jennifer with her hand raised for public comments on items not on the agenda. So I will call on Jennifer.
Okay, welcome, Jennifer. If you could unmute yourself.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. I am raising this topic, which is sort of, it's unrelated to the agenda today, but sort of related. I shared a report with you on the role of elected officials in the NEPA process. And I sent it to the chair, Mr. Royce. I hope you had a chance to see it. I have previously advocated about this issue with Chair Ortiz when he was chairing the roundtable. It relates to a lot of environmental law issues and what the role of elected officials is on. And I think I haven't seen a response. Part of it is notification to the public on any of your activities, any of the FAA's activities. The issue that there's just no transparency on how NEPA is being done right now. And so I wanted to just mention it, and I'll continue to follow up on it and hope you will have a chance to discuss it at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Could you give me your last name and your residence or your?
Yes, it's Jennifer Landisman, and my city is, I am a resident of Palo Alto.
Ms. Lansford, I do not recall receiving that, and if I did and did not react to it, my apologies. Could you please send it to me again?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you so much for letting me know. I sent it to a public address that I saw for you, so that may have been the error. I copied Ms. Montes, but I will look for it. I'll make sure to send it again, and thank you for letting me know.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, are there any other public comments? And by the way, just to remind people, state law normally precludes us from commenting on any public comment relating to non-agenda items, except to ask clarifying questions. So we'll try to abide that. I'll come back to the membership to see if they have any clarifying questions. Are there any other public comments?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Landisman, for your comment. Chairman, I do not have any more virtual hands raised for public items not on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll close the public comment section for non-agenda items. We'll take it back to the membership and see if there's any questions from the members on any of the public comments. Anne, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair Royce. Ms. Landisman, since I chair the Ground-Based Noise Committee, I would love to see that too. My computer and all my other emails are out, so my city email is the only way people can find me right now. So city.millbrae.ca.us. I would like to read that too.
Okay, if you could send Ms. Lansford, send to Angela, and we'll ask Angela to make sure it gets to all three of the committee members.
Oh, that's great. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, with that, I'm sorry. Did I miss something? Okay. With that,
I just want to say thank you. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
With that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. This includes two items: action to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda, and the Brown Act remote meetings, which gives us the authority in the finding necessary to hold these meetings in a remote venue. Any council member may ask that a item be removed, and if so, we'll remove it. Otherwise, we'll vote on the items as one motion, or any members of the public may request a member to remove an item. Does any council member wish to discuss either one of these two items, the agenda or the Brown Act remote meetings? Hearing none, does any member of the public wish to have any of these two items removed for discussion? Seeing no hands, we then will entertain a motion. Well, actually, are there any public comments on any one of these on the consent agenda?
Thank you, Chairman Royce. If we can give it just a second or two, but I do not see any virtual hands raised for this item. Thank you.
We'll then close the public comment request on the consent agenda and ask for a vote. It'll be a roll call vote. So Kathleen, if I can ask you to please take it. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
You so have a motion.
Motion and second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Kathleen, could you please take a roll call vote on the motion?
On the motion for the Brown resolution, Chair Royce,
Yes.
Member
This would be
Schneider,
on this would be on the total.
on the consent agenda, stand corrected.
Yes, yes.
So that's yes from the chair, Member Schneider,
Yes.
Member Di Giovanni,
Yes.
and the motion passes.
Okay, motion's carried. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the meat of the meeting, which are the agenda items. And we have 5 topics today that hopefully time will permit us to have a discussion around. One, we want to do a brief update on the last meeting, anything that has transpired on those topics since the last meeting. 2, we have a special guest today, Emily Tranter, the Executive Director and National Coordinator of N.O.I.S.E. She'll give us an update. We'll get into that in a minute. Number 3, we will also discuss the priorities and goals for this committee for the upcoming year. And then item 4 is items of current interest, and that will include the airport noise report. There's an article on the health impacts of noise, which we're seeing more and more of. So with that, let's move to the first item, item 3, which is introduction update. I just want to highlight from last meeting, which was May 25th. We only meet twice a year, so it's easy to forget what we talked about and where we stand. But if you recall, at the last meeting, we had a legislative update from Emily from N.O.I.S.E, and we also talked about future legislative needs, and we identified 4 areas: the health impacts of noise, the alternate noise metrics and where they started from, the air taxi, urban air mobility. Tim Middleton gave us a presentation on that, and the status of the supersonic flight initiative that Gene Rendell gave us a discussion on. I did share with the roundtable as a whole these 4 items. Those of you who were at that meeting can remember there was a fair amount of discussion, particularly around alternate noise impacts and the unmanned aircraft mobility, the speed at which those are taking place, and whether or not there's some action that we need to take on that. That was for the roundtable's discussion, not necessarily our committee, but did share it with the roundtable. I wanted to see, Tim, if you gave the presentation on one, I know you're standing in for Gene today on the other 2. Any updates on any of those items from your perspective?
Hi, Chairman. Just briefly, the AAM and the UAM, the urban air taxi, that continues to move forward. Legislatively, there's really not much right now. There's just, I think I mentioned that in June, the House and the Senate have agreed to legislation just to address advanced air mobility and how that might impact or change some of the FARs potentially. But that was all done months ago, and it's already in committee reconciliation. And so that's expected to be signed, I think, within the next few months. But that's not any major change. It's just the FAA and the government knows that they have to address those urban air taxis. For supersonic, I don't have any updates currently, other than that they continue to, put press releases out and continue to do work. And the other one for the alternative noise metrics, there's no updates on that I know of right now, other than that the FAA continues to pursue information on that and how they could potentially use those alternative metrics as part of both the Ascent and the Clean program. And I'll have an update later about the legislation stuff, but basically with the FAA reauthorization in 2023, that's something that could potentially be a item for members of this committee to think about, so that's my update for this section.
Okay. I appreciate it. Let me get the last item we talked about last time, then we'll go to member comments. We also at the last meeting talked about Title 21, and Kathleen, I think there's been an update on that. Would you mind sharing that?
Of course. This is part of a California state mandated requirement that the airports report quarterly on certain categories of airports. And San Francisco SFO prepares the required data. They send it to the roundtable for processing, and then we, in turn, by deadlines, forward it to the state of California to comply with the regulation. So that's all being done as part of our processing, internal administrative ministerial processing. And it's ultimately when that happens, and it happened yesterday, I believe, Angela filed for the previous quarter. And so that should be up on the San Francisco website relatively soon and available for public review.
Okay, great. So effectively that process has been reviewed, revised, and updated and is now in place. And
Perfectly said.
information is all available. Okay, thank you. I don't think we've talked about anything else at the last meeting, but the members can correct me if I'm wrong. So with that, let's go to the members and see if they have any questions or comments. Anne, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Chair. And this, I was trying to pop back to the agenda to see if it comes up. When Mr. Middleton talked about a couple of the updates, it made me think of something that happens with trains. And since Chairman Royce isn't by a train, all of us that are along the Caltrain track, I would imagine along the Amtrak, can request for a quiet zone. And it means that they have to be more careful about using their horns. I believe it's only about horns. Now, with taxis and being able to, I know they talk mainly that these taxis are going to be in big urban areas, but I have a feeling that they're going to be flying over us to get to the airport. Would we be able to, or should we be asking for quiet zones. So that, let's say somebody's coming from the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco, and I don't think it has a helicopter pad, but it might. Would they have to go out over the bay as opposed to flying over Brisbane, South City, San Bruno, Millbrae, et cetera, on that? So I think maybe we should loop back and start thinking about quiet zones. And I'm sure it's not allowed. I'm sure the FAA says we can't do it, but let's talk about it.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Ann.
for everybody else on the call, for all of us along the railroad tracks, we have to request it. And it's a little problematic, but at least it can reduce some noise.
And is there a site where people can go and look at the process and what it does and how to request it? Is there a link?
Millbrae hasn't done it yet, but as we litigate high-speed rail, since that's public, it is one of our concerns because we have 2 at-grade crossings. Why don't I see if I can ask my staff to do a little bit of research? I think I am feeling just overwhelmed right now with everything, but I know I believe San Mateo's done a fly quiet zone. Some of the cities south of us do. It's just tough when your stations are really close together because the horns are on the whole time.
Yeah, I'm guessing that we did bring this to the attention of the roundtable. I'm guessing the roundtable may want to give some thought to whether or not this is a topic of special interest and appoint a task force to sort of monitor it and see what responsibilities or what role the roundtable can play, because the land use issues around who has control over it, and they will fly over different cities, and how that's all monitored, I think, is of some interest. And
Right.
while we're relatively quiet, from what I understand from the last report, in fact, very quiet, nevertheless, there's got to be some disruption, including noise, that we need to be concerned about. So
I agree with you completely, but I also think that even if it's a little bit of noise, it's the accumulative impact. And speaking for my city, given that the airport seems to discount, we're noisy because we already have trains. We're noisy because we already have 2 freeways and El Camino. Eventually, people can't keep pointing fingers at somebody else. That's the way of looking at it.
Right, thank you. By the way,
and I also think there's the privacy issue, which is way outside of our bailiwick, but there is a privacy.
Yeah, okay. We'll make a note of that, and Kathleen will prepare some comments for the roundtable around this. I will, by the way, Ann, I will note, I don't live next to a train track now. I grew up right next to a train track, and I still recall every morning, 3 a.m. when that train comes in. So it's why I sleep so soundly tonight. It taught me to ignore all noises. So anyway, Councilmember DiGiovanni, any comments on the last meeting report?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say I'd like to support Member Schneider and yours as well, looking into that. Not just because Daly City is right next to San Francisco with the urban air traffic, like she was mentioning, just as an example. This is not to target any one company, but primarily they'll probably be coming out of that area, like with Salesforce or some other place, and it will affect all in San Mateo County and wherever, to look into that. And I agree, it's a cumulative impact on the residents that could be detrimental to their health.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank
So
you.
I thank both of you. Thank you.
Make a note. I don't have anything to add other than the fact that I did note a news report with, I think it was United, Kathleen, correct me, just placed a large order for supersonics. Not sure when that would be delivered, but that is moving forward, and maybe something we want to ask the roundtable to monitor. It's not legislation per se, but it is something we talked about last time, and that's some update, I guess. We do have a number of guests on the call. They're on the panel. I'm going to open up the discussion to them before we get to the public roundtable. Does any of our guests or staff have any comments to add on the last meeting to follow up? Don't see any hands raised. So with that, we'll go to public comment on item number 3. So Angela, do we have any hands raised from the public on the follow-up from the meeting of May 25th?
Thank you, Chair. And as a reminder, if you wish to speak on item 3, you may raise your hand through the Zoom feature or by pressing *9 if you are calling by phone. But Mr. Chair, I do not see any virtual hands raised for item 3. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll close public comment and we move.
I'm sorry, Chair. Oh,
Please.
I saw a hand raised and it went there. I do see a
Oh.
hand from Jennifer.
Oh, okay, my apologies.
Pardon me.
Thank you, Member Schneider. Yes, I now see a hand from Jennifer Landesman. So allow me, I got my timer to work. So allow me to share my screen for my timer. 1 second. And I will call on Ms. Landesman.
Okay, Ms. Landesman.
Thank
the floor
you.
is yours.
Hi, just briefly, you spoke about the new entrants or UAAM, all the AMs. And the one thing that keeps bugging me about this is that, you know, the industry has gone to a lot of trouble to reduce high frequency noise. But all of these, you know, new aircraft do not consider lower frequency noise. So this might be of interest, and I just want to point that out. I think that will probably be a very big problem the closer they are to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you,
Great,
Ms.
great.
Landesman.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate the comment.
And Chairman,
And excuse me, Chair,
Yes.
when you brought up the supersonics,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be today, but in the future, could staff let us know if supersonics, when they're departing, or do they have the same kind of low frequency noise? Is it going to be lesser? I could only wish. Or is it going to be greater? Because we haven't talked about that at all. And I think we have our next ground-based noise meeting in November, correct? I think we're November. So if we could put supersonics and low frequency noise on that agenda.
We'll take care of it for you, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll close the discussion on this item and move to the next item, which is the meat of our meeting today, and that's an update. And we have with us Emily Tranter, the Executive Director and National Coordinator of N.O.I.S.E. Emily was our guest speaker last time, and we have a membership with her group, and we're planning on utilize her a lot because she brings a lot to the table and can keep us abreast of what's going on. We did ask Emily if she could speak to 4 broad topics, but not be limited to that. They're listed on your agenda. Obviously, the key interest this year is FAA reauthorization and what's going on there, and would like to have a discussion on what role and when we should play. Interesting, underline that, new legislative proposals, actions by other roundtables. What's going on elsewhere that we should be aware of that we may want to copy from, I guess, best practices. And last but not least, is at least if she's aware of any suggestions for actions that we ought to be recommending to the roundtable as a whole. So Emily, we're pleased to have you back. So welcome, and floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all so much. And I want to say that though I present in this capacity, I think it's just a huge kudos to the roundtable that in the interim, I'm kind of consistently in communication with your staff. And that's I've said this often and probably hear many times, but N.O.I.S.E, our organization, is a national organization and advocacy group on aviation noise issues from the community perspective. But we really want to take the lead of our members to be as big of a resource or as strong of a resource to folks as we can. And so I'm just happy to kind of come today to talk about the setup that your chair and that your staff has put forward so that N.O.I.S.E can be a ongoing continual resource and national federal pipeline to you all both ways, so that you can, like the chair said, get the most out of the organization and the membership. And I think it's very gratifying for us and very helpful to us to have the roundtable on as such an active member. So, and I think that probably Tim will talk about this as well later. And Brian may have some input as well on timing, but to start off with the FAA reauthorization. Those conversations will start. They're already starting kind of back of the house. So, both sides of the Senate and the House will need to, on the FAA subcommittee and then on Commerce Aviation subcommittee, start to kind of build out what the big major framework for the 4-year bill will look like. Sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 6, but or shorter. It doesn't have a exact lifespan, but they'll start to build out that framework. And already the committee on the House side has reached out to N.O.I.S.E to say, what priorities would you like in this bill? Just so we can start kind of gleaning things and understanding. And so one of the things we've had in the conversations that we do or try to do monthly, I was joking, Chair, before you got on with Kathleen, that this time I've got full working Wi-Fi and my speaker works, because we've had a couple technical difficulties in our last couple of check-ins. However, we are touching base monthly to make sure that this communication is continuous and we don't just kind of wait and then for the next meeting and then update basically cold. So I think in terms of the FAA reauthorization, when the new Congress starts, which will be January 5th of 2023, there will be a couple things that will be determining factors on kind of the trajectory and the what's included, and then what the makeup of this bill, and then what the time frame of the bill would be. One is moving back to November. The election will have a lot to do with that. If the House flips to Republican majority, there will be completely new chairs of committees of jurisdiction, of the Transportation Committee, the Aviation Subcommittee, all of that. And then of the Appropriations Committee, which won't have anything to do with authorizing. However, it just kind of all plays together, all these moving pieces. There will be new leadership in terms of Speaker of the House, everything. And then on the minority side, whatever that is, there's always going to be a lot of shifts. So in any new Congress, whether or not there is a new majority, there's going to be new leadership in roles that will impact certain things like the FAA reauthorization. So we'll know a little bit more about kind of the general timeframe, and the impacts of the election outcome are obviously in November, hopefully, although there have been years where it's taken longer. And then once that new Congress is sworn in January, then that's when whatever committee, whoever the leadership is, and the new staff and the new majority, the new chairman and ranking members start to really have those conversations at the staff level and start to build out the base of the bill. So they've already started now, because in the Senate, well, and the Senate could flip as well, but that's a little less likely at this point, but not nearly out of the question. But they've started those conversations to just kind of try and get a head start, but those will start in earnest after January. And so I think it would behoove us to, and what we've talked about in the sort of our organization check-in meetings, is to come up with things that we want to have included or be considered in that larger authorization bill. And I don't think that question needs to be answered today. I think we've got until the end of the year and probably longer, because things take a lot longer in Congress than we ever hope they will. But start to think about 1 or 2 priorities that the Roundtable would like to bring forward. Now, the N.O.I.S.E organization obviously will have its own platform. In my tenure, there's never been anything that directly conflicts, because you all may have things that are individual. And that may be, I'm happy to answer questions. Our staff is happy to answer questions. And this all ties together because other roundtables can help to kind of inform and talk about best practices. But if there are things that the Roundtable would like from a national perspective for the organization to consider, this is kind of the time for us to be thinking about those, because there is always the sort of national perspective that benefits the local roundtables or the local, the individual airports. And then there are things that make most sense for you all that may not benefit everybody, but they're not going to be detrimental to anyone else. So it's it's a longer conversation, and that's why it's really exciting to be talking on a regular basis with everyone so that we can think about these things, have nuanced conversations, and not throw anything forward that isn't going to be useful. So I think in terms of that timeline and FAA reauthorization, we can kind of start to think about, and I think, Kathleen's talked a lot with me about nighttime noise, and if there are pieces of policy that could address that, and it's a difficult nut to crack. However, if it's got appetite, so that certainly is a point of discussion that should be at the front of mind. But there is also, I want to caution, and FAA reauthorization is a great vehicle, because you can get national support and it can get in these big bills, and it's not, or the big bill, it's not a one-off that has to be carried by a lot of people. But legislation has its limitations because of how the FAA operates and how it has been chartered, to, with safety first as its number one goal. And so a lot of what we have seen over the last, I've only been around, 16 years, but I think it's more like 50 years of the organization at this point, is that there's a lot of well-intended legislation that then isn't implemented because the FAA can turn to a lot of important standing regulations that will negate or not allow that legislation to happen. So all that said, reauthorization is a great vehicle for this. We can have kind of thoughtful conversation leading up to it, and legislation in general. There's certainly places, Congresswoman Spears introduced some really great legislation over the last couple Congresses, and really meaningful stuff that would have made a difference. It's also just difficult to move forward, but it's not to say that legislation is a fool's errand or something that that the organization wouldn't support. Just want to really stay engaged enough to say, okay, this is what could work, or just give you our professional opinion about, how then we could triangulate that with regulations and with working more on a SFO level rather than a national level. And then we, that may not be our 100% bailiwick, but we can say this is where we think it makes sense. And Brian, you have your hand up, and I would love to pause for a question, because this is a great place before I move on.
Oh, no, I was going to add a point about the process, Emily, but why don't you go ahead and finish? I don't have anything. I just want to be sure I've got it up to remind myself about something. Okay,
no problem. And I can pause for questions now or at the end as well, whatever makes most sense for you all. So if anyone else has a question, please just raise their hand so I can pause. But I think that, again, if there are pieces of legislation that make sense, right now is the best time because of this reauthorization. We can fit those in there, and that's the best vehicle. And then regulatorily, there is a lot to be done, a lot of conversations to be had, a lot of sort of smaller pieces that can be moved that maybe have, that are more localized. So that's the sort of like the general sort of legislation and FAA authorization background. And I will give you an example as this all kind of ties together for roundtables and best practices and things like that. There are a lot of, if we take it back to the 30,000 foot view, which is, I love airport and noise puns. If we take it back, RNAV, PBN, implementation, next gen implementation has impacted, airports across the country, right? That's the mandate. That's what next gen is. There have been airports such as the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport that has the NOC, which is the Noise Oversight Committee, which is basically, it's not just the city of Minneapolis, it's all of the surrounding suburbs that impacted communities. They work very closely with their airport. It's an airport sponsored roundtable, much like you all, in terms of, the collaborative efforts and things like that. But, in 2012, when PBN was going to be implemented, they took a step back and said, don't, because we're not sure there's been enough community engagement. And they had the airports, the airport really sponsor that and say no, basically, to the FAA. So in the last decade, there has not been the kind of departure RNAV PBN procedures implemented at MSP because other airports were then implemented in place. So I bring that up to the chair's point about other roundtables. And it's sometimes hard to give you all best practices or advice because it's the institutional knowledge, the way that this has been set up, the collaboration with your airport, the fact that you've always had a technical consultant on hand. HMMH is a really great resource to you all. You all have a wonderful setup and how to address these issues. And it's still very, very complex. But to go back to Minneapolis for just a moment, moving forward, if PBN comes back, their main goal is to work together as surrounding communities that are on the NOC, that are NOC members, to have shared goals, shared perspective as they communicate with the FAA and be communicating with their MAC, which is their Metropolitan Airport Commission, to have these kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page. And I think that moving forward, that is the kind of dichotomy. It's the legislation, the FAA reauthorization moving forward, and then it's what y'all are doing at the local level with your roundtable to work with the FAA, with your airport, as new procedures, as GBAS, as all of these different aspects are implemented and planned to make sure that that the community engagement is robust and that the perspective is there. And I think that as we move forward, particularly over the next 2 years with FAA reauthorization, because I can imagine they'll get a continuing resolution and won't just be done in 2023. And then also implementation of other PBN procedures across the country, there will be more stories to share and there will be more kind of collaboration with other roundtables to say, particularly in Minneapolis, I'm thinking Minneapolis, O'Hare has a very robust roundtable. There's community engagement in Seattle, out here in Washington, DC, which is the last thing I'm going to say that kind of has a little bit of a side note. But that will be the opportunity to collaborate on shared goals with roundtables across the country that are really, really meaningful kind of changes, whether it be nighttime noise, whether it be community engagement, that you all can be a positive and really, really progressive. And I don't mean politically progressive. I just mean making progress with the collaboration with the FAA. So that, and then let me just say one final thing on roundtables, which I think is important and really kind of a cool story, is that, and I think probably many of you have heard this, but the National Airport, DCA Airport, had various iterations of roundtables and discussions, and over the last 2 years, worked to bring in the community to work with the FAA. And I'm talking the tower lead was in meetings with communities, with their consultants to help design tracks, look at what the tracks would mean and what the impact would be. The FAA was very open in that scenario, in that situation, in that locale to input, but it was all had to be implementable. It all had to be safe, and dealing with a lot of, the White House and Capitol and all of that, it made it very complicated, but really positive, robust and focused engagement from the community, which I think you guys have a head start because you are a premier and most, I think the longest standing airport noise roundtable. really can be effective, because I do, in that scenario, there was real collaboration between literal community members, not even elected officials. And I think elected officials are a really great tool to have at the table, is to have those individuals, but with FAA, tower, policymakers, airlines, and the airport, and had these sit downs and help design the tracks and get as close as everyone could to the best. So I can give way more information on that. Chair, we've talked about this when I was having some audio difficulties, and so I think we could even dig it. I could talk for 2 hours on that, but I wanted to give it as an example of really meaningful commitment on behalf of the FAA at airports, at certain towers, and how we could replicate that and make it a really positive experience. Everything can't be replicated everywhere. Every airport's different. Every community engagement is different. But I do think that it's a really good example of collaborative efforts that aren't legislation, that aren't regulatory, that are down kind of from the bottom up, that are making a world of difference and incremental changes towards a great goal. So talked a lot. I will pause and appreciate the time today.
Great, thank you. Emily, one last topic. Are there any new interesting legislative proposals that you want to bring to our attention? Or are they all on hold pending the midterm elections and what might happen?
Yeah, I think there were some pieces of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, that had kind of clean and quieter investments into aircraft. But other than that, right now, I mean, there's not going to be a whole lot new introduced between now and the end of the year. Just for kind of a broader perspective, it's the 15th now. As soon as they likely don't meet the budget deadline, which is September 30th, and pass a continuing resolution, my anticipation would be that they would go out of session for the month of October, so that members can go back to their district and campaign. Okay. And then after the November elections, will be lame duck. So I think, Chair, we will see in January new and interesting legislation introduced, but also between now and then, particularly, as I said, within the framework of the FAA reauthorization, but if there are other pieces that make sense, anything we could introduce and or really support and being proactive about that. Reactive when appropriate, and then proactive.
Gotcha. Thank you. Well, let me bring it back to the committee here and get some feedback. But first of all, Brian, I wanted to recognize you, and if you would like any comments you'd like to add.
Well, it just occurred to me as Emily was speaking, Mr. Chair, that it might behoove the roundtable to consider having a legislative meeting earlier in 2023 than you might not otherwise have anticipated, because Congress is going to move forward, and a lot of the choices are going to be made throughout the year, no matter which party is involved. And if you wait until May, as I think happened this year, that just might be too late. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to note is that it's always easiest as if you want to have a change in the world, it's always easiest as if the federal agency makes a change on its own. I mean, that's the easiest way to get something done, even though moving sometimes a federal agency is itself its own difficulty. But moving a piece of legislation or getting it changed by these authorization bills is another level of difficulty in its own. So when you do meet next year early, I hope that someone would have spoken to the new member of Congress and their staff, and also try to identify one or two priorities that the roundtable wishes to focus on that are realistic and that the new member might be able to champion. But I also wanted to point out that if the Democrats are not in control next year, we nonetheless have two Bay Area members that are members of the subcommittee on that's relevant, and that's Mr. Garamendi and Mr. Tessanier. They'll probably stay. They have some good, just based upon their the longevity they have here, I would imagine that even though the committees will be rejuggered and the would be rejiggered and the Democratic membership reduced. Those two have a lot of seniority. So point being, you've got some allies, natural allies potentially in the Bay Area. As long as you have one or two priorities identified early, and as long as those priorities couldn't be done any other way, because if whatever it is you've identified could be done through an FAA change, the staff and the committee is probably going to want you to focus on that.
Great. I appreciate it. I think your comments are well taken, particularly the timing of the next meeting. Next May 25th, maybe a little too late to be
It's
be very impactful.
probably
So-
way too late. Yeah.
Let me bring it back again to the membership. Anne, I see your hand is raised. I'll recognize you.
I have a number of things, and again, I was looking at the agenda to see where they might fit. But given that I believe we've got working group in October and ground-based noise in November, and then the full roundtable the beginning of December, I'm not the chair of working group, but I can say that I think our ground-based noise meeting should probably at least half of it be dedicated to legislation. If we're going to have a new congressperson, a new congressman. If it is Kevin Mullen, he did serve on the roundtable for a few years before he went to the assembly. If it's Supervisor Canepa, either way, Assemblyman Mullen tends to meet with the local governments in December. I think we should be ready to whomever our congressperson is, that we ask for a stand-on meeting, a single meeting just on airport-related issues in that December or November timeframe. But again, I'm happy to offer up at least half of ground-based noise to the in-depth discussion of legislation that is specific to that. And I think we should probably ask Sam Hindy, the chair of working group, that they put legislation on the October meeting so that we're geared up. And then I'm a little rusty on the 8 bills that Congresswoman Spear introduced. I think we should probably also be encouraging our new congressperson to try to get onto the right committees, because that's a huge loss, losing the congresswoman and her leadership in that. So we've got some work to do just to make sure we're represented on that. And now I'm going to take us off of what the roundtable is. A little bit at the National League of Cities level, but definitely at the League of California Cities, we need to be advocating, and we can do that between our meetings and making sure that our lobbyists at California are working on this and our lobbyists at the national level are working on this. And then I can't remember if I've announced this, but Millbrae has hired our own lobbyists because we are so impacted by regional entities that they're more Sacramento based. We don't have that, but hopefully they will be helping us push for all things Millbrae. And frankly, a lot of that is transportation related on there. So I think we start building our partnerships on that. In terms of everything that Ms. Tranter said, a lot of it is still up in the air, meaning literally. These are all things happening in the air as opposed to in the ground. I would really love to see Congresswoman Spear's 8 bills, get an update on those. And again, I think we can do that offline. So we bring ourselves back up to speed. And maybe, Chair, if you agree, we ask for the full roundtable to have a review of them in their October meeting. So we're ready to say which ones are our priorities at the December meeting. And that gears us up for any new legislation. I think I'm more familiar with the state process than the federal process of introductions and deadlines. Brian would know all that. But given that we're going to have a new congressperson to bring on, we're going to have new roundtable members too. Elmer Martinez Ceballos has just been appointed to Redwood City. I ran into him last week and he said he thinks he's going to be appointed to Airport Roundtable. He's a former staffer of Assemblyman Mullen. So I think it's Assemblyman Mullen. So we should have, another new skill set to bring on board on that. But that's kind of how I'm looking at this. But we need to get our issues into the UC Davis Symposium. So by our issues, I mean ground-based noise, of course, but I mean everything that affects us. Let's make sure that we've also got all those people that attend that. And I think I think they're doing their call for papers, but we have a public member who's part of that committee, and I'm going to be pushing for ground-based noise to be at the UC Davis Symposium because it's never directly dealt with in the years that I've been paying attention. So that's kind of my cut on that. If we all think that Congresswoman Spears' 8 bills cover pretty much everything, except what I'm not sure if, Emily, you talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, including funding for quieter, cleaner airplanes. I'm sure that's in the air. I'm sure it has no incentive for what's happening on the low frequency takeoff. So that would be my big ad right there, that we need to start pushing the designers to get rid of low frequency noise. And ultimately, that's the way to get rid of that problem, because even all electric flights, when I was in that training, the all electric planes are still going to need heavier or possibly fuel powered work on takeoff. I could be completely wrong, and I'm sure we've got staff who can explain that, but we need to get the departure noise down. And if it can go all electric and it's quieter, yay. But the last time I attended the electric flights, they still needed gas powered to get off the ground.
Yeah, right.
So that means the noise associated with that. So I think that's all of mine. Again, let's use ground-based noise in November to get us ready. Davis Symposium, that's not till February. And a meeting with our new congressperson, whomever that will be, and also see if we can get that staff person, whoever that staff person will be, to be as regular as Kathleen was and as Brian is.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. Pamela, did you have any comments or any follow-up to the presentation?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to support what Brian Perkins had said and suggested, that we not wait until May to have another meeting, and that the timeliness of it, giving the midterms and what's going to happen, that we need to be there on the forefront of things and to push at all levels, whatever we got. And definitely supporting all the legislation from Congresswoman Spear. And if anything we can add into that with our roundtable suggestion, that'd be great, and moving it forward as fast as we can. And thank you, Mr. Perkins, and thank you for the other presentation. It was great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. Let me.
To the chair, I'm sorry, I forgot one more.
Sure.
When Emily talked about the FAA constantly using safety first as their fallback, in my field, in the recycling field, terminology has been taken over by other interests. For example, resource recovery used to mean recycling. Now it means burning garbage. So in my field, we talk about taking back terminology. So whereas the FAA, rightly so, is caring about safety for its passengers in the air, there is safety for the people on the ground. So we need to make sure that in the definition of safety, it includes safety for people on the ground. And that's the oversimplification, but that really then will fall into where Chair Hindi wants to go, which is this noise is interrupting sleep, which is interrupting health, which means none of us function as well when we don't have enough sleep, and it's health and safety. So it brings that health component back into the safety definition. So I think we just need to take it back from the FAA. It doesn't just mean in the air. It means many more things than that.
I have never heard it stated that way. And I want to take a minute to react to it, because that it should be really simple, but that's a really novel way to put it. I think the reaction, right, is that no one wants to feel like they're going to fall out of the sky. However, there can be a subset to that, as you just said, and what safety actually means. It's not separate. It's there's safety in the air, safety of us, not, of the airplanes, but then all that other safety. So I don't want to pontificate too much on what you just said, other than to say that's a very interesting idea, and maybe we can, just think that out much further, and I'll do some follow up on that, because that's actually really fascinating to think through.
Good. Okay. Are there other comments from other staff members or guests on the panel before we go to public comment? I don't see any hands raised. Let me just make a couple comments here. I appreciate very much the presentation, Emily. I thought you were spot on a number of the points. I did take some takeaways. I think one of the things we talked about for FAA was trying to identify any actions that we should be taking today in light of the fact that a letter probably wouldn't be appropriate till after the elections or maybe even after January. But to be effective, under the assumption we wouldn't be meeting till late spring, we ought to do something now. Now, if we meet in January, we've got some time, but I think it is important to sort of identify what we might want to say in that letter around FAA authorization. I heard three things that popped up to me anyway, or that I just want to make sure if you have other thoughts in that letter, let us know. I'm concerned about getting too much stuff in there because you lose your message. And again, these could be the topics with the new elected congressman too, because I like the concept of meeting with him sooner rather than later, once he or she is elected. But the two things I heard was nighttime noise. I clearly think that's an element of great concern to us, and we ought to have a bulletin on that. That's probably the number one thing we've been talking about, that and the noise metrics. And I guess you could separate them. So that's 1 and 2 or 2 and 1, how you want to add it. The third thing though, and that we did not talk about, that Kathleen had raised with me, which I thought was fascinating, was we've not been successful in trying to expand the protections for people who are outside of the contours with respect to insulation programs, et cetera. But there is a concern over aviation over schools during school hours and what impact that might have on school kids. I don't know if that's a problem in the Bay Area, but it may be worth understanding because while there's a detrimental impact, which has been documented up and down on impacts on health and sleep during the nighttime, there's got to be an impact on school kids too if they're being affected by if the routes overlay schools. And maybe there's some expansion of insulation programs that we ought to be at least bringing to someone's attention. So that may be something part of this letter or independent of it that we may want to give some thought to. Kathleen, you may want to expand on that. I probably not articulating it quite as well as you did to me. Well, nearly as well as you did to me, but I like the concept.
I don't think I could add anything else. It's a concept that came to me through the last ground-based noise meeting when we were looking at images of nearby structures near the takeoff end of the runway. And Member Schneider pointed out that there was a school there, and Lomita, I believe it was called Lomita Elementary. And it's very near the end of the runway. And I have not had time to investigate the particulars of that school and whether or not they've paid for their own insulation. I have no idea what their status is, but it just struck me that the FAA doesn't have a category for schools that I can see. And if they did, chances are this school wouldn't reach the 65 limit anyway, because the surrounding area is not in 65, above 65. So I just wonder, if there isn't some attractive kind of, exception to the 65. And this would be, to me, a very attractive thing to use school children learning to read and write who cannot hear all accurately throughout the day. And so I think and it would be a small exception, but it would be, nose under the camel's tent, perhaps. Just a thought, something we want to kind of maybe follow up on.
It's a potential follow-up item, action item. Yeah, I agree. Okay, with that, I did make a number of notes there, and I think there's some great suggestions moving forward. Before we go to public, well, let's go to public comment now. We come back with closing comments. Again, Angela, if you could open the public lines, and we'll see if there's any hands raised. Before we do that, Brian, I see your hands up again. Did you care to make a comment before we go to public comment?
Right. I just wanted to point out that with respect to noise in schools, there's yet another school. That one's in San Bruno. It's the end of runway 28. But beyond that, California itself, of course, by and large, governs the funding of school reconstruction. And there's already a law that says that if you're going to reconstruct a school or construct a school near an airport, there has to be a sign off basically from the state that the airport's far enough away that it's safe. But beyond that, I think you'd be more successful in terms of the short term of getting something changed in California law so that noise insulation was, if it's not already, a preferred element of any school bond and reconstruction. I would think it would naturally be part of that already, but someone may want to check that, because if not, and it requires state legislation, well, of course, next year there's an opportunity for state legislation on noise in schools.
That's a great suggestion. That's a great idea. We will follow up on that.
Mhm.
So with that, let's move to public comment then. If we could, Angela, if you could open it up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. As a reminder, if you wish to speak on item 4, please raise your hand through the Zoom feature. For those joining by phone, please press *9. And I do see 2 hands raised, so I will first call on Miss Darlene Yapley, followed by Miss Jennifer Landesman. 1 second, please. Ms. Yapley?
There's no debate about the importance of resubmitting Jackie Spears' bills. That's great news. I think the theme that I want to focus on is a little bit of what's been mentioned by several people, which is trying to come up with short-term bills where there's appetite to get them approved that sticks the nose under the camel's tent. And I think if the skill set available here at the San Francisco Roundtable can identify some of these types of bills that can be crafted for whether it's nighttime metrics or even the schools, although that might be at a state level, I think we need to move the needle further. And I think this roundtable, unlike any other roundtable, has a congressional rep that has submitted more bills than ever on aviation. You have Kathleen with all of her expertise. You have a ledge subcommittee and a consultant. So I would encourage you to tap these unique assets to try to come up with these incremental or short-term bills that have a likelihood of passing. They might not hit the big home run, but at least you can get a couple base hits. And reviewing and supporting the already submitted bills is straightforward. I don't think that's a heavy lift. It's very straightforward. I think the heavy lift, and I'm requesting that of the roundtable, is to take your tremendous assets and figure out how something could be created that is more short-term, but again, moves the needle. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yapley. I will now call on Ms. Jennifer Landesman.
Thank you. I want to build on what Mr. Perkins said, that it's always better to, it's great if we can build off of whatever the agency is doing on its own. And the agency is undergoing a noise policy review that was supposed to be inclusive of community voices. They are supposed to respond to the General Accountability Office by the end of September. And the March 17th hearing was supposed to have a follow-up by the Aviation Subcommittee. That has not been done. I'm surprised that this is not a priority to understand where the agency is coming from. Because if I was asked to just write down any, legislation, I wouldn't know where to start because we've worked on this for 8 years. We need to hear back from the agency. It's their time to inform us. And it's actually very unfair that the public is being asked to give these ideas in a vacuum. So as far as legislation, I think, it should reflect the voices and needs of the American public. And I'm hoping that leadership will look at that, not just trying to figure out how to work with this bureaucracy. And thank you, Emily, for your update. We do have some experience here with robust community engagement, but I think I just try to put a table together on all the ones we've experienced here. And I think it would be great to put that on a chart and actually compare it with other places. And if you're willing to, I would love, I'll call you up and share my chart with you. And because I think I'm not so crazy about the DC model, because I think it did not achieve the things that we're looking for here in the Bay Area, which is to have appropriate noise assessments and paid for by the responsible agency. Thank you.
Jennifer, always welcome your call. It's always great to catch up. So we'll look forward to that.
Thank you, Ms. Lansberg. Okay, are there other public comments, Angela?
Thank you, Chairman. We do not have any more virtual hands raised for item 4.
Okay, we will close public comment on item 4 and bring it back to the membership for any last minute comments or response to anything they've heard. This was a discussion item as much as anything, but if there's any actions that any members would like to propose, please let us know. I do know there's some comments, a number of comments, I think, that will be interesting to share with the roundtable as a whole and see if there's any direction given by them. And we may have to give some thought to any suggested recommendations that we want the roundtable to take. But there are some great comments here, and we made a list of all of them. I'm sure Kathleen's been busily writing, as I know I have, and I know the members have. So any final comments? Member Schneider?
Thank you, Chair. Emily, I know that you guys are now requesting that we, the members of the roundtable, get to read the newsletter, but, and this could be offline, I think some of my staff needs to read that newsletter. So is there an affiliate membership that cities could go so that we could then share that same information with our staff? And again, if this is something offline that you can deal with Kathleen, there's just great information in it. And I used to share it, but now I can't.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's talk offline because I don't think there should
Okay.
be any issue with that.
Pardon
ahead.
me, through the chair, and I think Kathleen was going to state this. I believe Member Schneider is talking about the airport
Oh,
noise report, and
Yeah.
that is not affiliated through.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's Ann Cohut, but anything that we share or that we put out as the organization, you should be able to share.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry. Angela and I have talked about newsletters and kind of updates and stuff. So I was thinking maybe we were going down that track, but and I will have a written update for the chair and for Kathleen about our November meeting in Kansas with the National League of Cities. That is still pending, kind of coming back from COVID. We've been an affiliate for a long time, but we're just trying to figure out what our role will be there. And if not, we're going to do something virtual that same month. So stay tuned for that, but that will be shared with staff to share out. So
Okay.
thank you all so much for today and the time.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm sorry, Pam, did you have any final comments before we close this agenda item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just in short, first, like you said, there's a lot of great information. And with Mr. Perkins and Emily and everyone, I just wanted to, maybe this is not the time, but when he mentioned about the schools again, because they were in the Bayshore area here, and I'm sure other places like Redwood City and other schools, that maybe there can be an assessment with the school districts in some manner that they can figure out some kind of way to see how it affects the children, and maybe put monitors, if necessary, at different sites, because we don't want anything to affect especially the children in our areas, underserved areas.
Okay, I appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
That's a great suggestion. And I know the noise monitoring subcommittee is going to meet relatively shortly, so we will ask that
Okay.
they put on their agenda. It's a great comment.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Chair Royce,
Yes.
just to add to that, Lamita Park School, the one that Kathleen mentioned, they lost by 500 and something votes, a bond measure for it. They're going to have a special election in June of 2023 to rebuild that school. So what Brian said in terms of making sure we're maximizing noise, I will tell you, High Speed Rail and their EIR said, yeah, it's going to be 65 decibels at that school, but it's already so noisy. So I think this is a great time to talk about schools. That's an exciting new addition to our work.
Yeah, great.
And
And we
I'll
can
go reach out
advocate
to
for
my
the-
school district that we do whatever we can to keep the kids safe. And that is our lowest income set of, and the lowest income communities of San Bruno and Millbrae attend that school.
Right. And then also, I wonder how much we can advocate ourselves for that, to push to make sure that they have the noise, like how it's built construction wise and other things as policymakers. And thank you, Ms. Whitworth.
Great comments, great thoughts. Okay, and I'm sure we've got them listed here for for a next follow-up. item. Okay, we'll close agenda item number 4, move to agenda item number 5. Time check is about 13 after, so we have about 15 minutes left. Item number, and by the way, Emily, thank you so much for being with us. Greatly appreciate your report and appreciate you taking the time. Always informative. So
And appreciate you all as well. So thank you. Thank you for the time.
thank you. Item number 5 is wanted to have a brief discussion over priorities and goals for the next year for this committee. This committee is, we've been trying to find a charter. I'm not sure we have an actual charter, but our mission's been explained or defined as dealing with updating the roundtable and keep the roundtable informed of federal legislative activity and actions we should be taking. Now, we have sort of indirectly expanded that to include advocacy, probably more than what might have been originally intended. I don't know. But irrespective of that, want to understand what we ought to focus on. I know Darlene Yapley in her comment made the comment about identifying some achievable goals that we can get done and not aim for the fences if they're not realistic. But we need to understand what they might be and how, and should we be moved forward in that direction, what the committee feels. Secondly, are there any broader categories that we want to start thinking about and come up with some action plans for the upcoming year? Understand we only meet twice a year under the constraints that we currently have. So we are limited in what we can do, but just want to get a feel from this committee what we ought to be focusing on. I guess, I mean, I've heard a couple things that have popped up to me that we want to keep our arms around. One is the updated FAA on their study review in the noise metrics category. I still think that's of critical importance. And nighttime noise is critical importance. And we've talked about a few other items today as well. But I'll open it up to the committee for any discussion on what the focus ought to be for 2023. Kathleen, do you want to elaborate on that? Our roundtable coordinator, so I want to make sure that she does so much of the work along with Angela.
No, I think you covered it, Chairman. It's what priorities you want to set, and I think actually you've sort of covered some of that in the previous item number 4.
Yeah.
So that kind of slops over into this a little bit.
That's well put. I think we did as well. Any feedback from committee members? Pamela, did you have any thoughts on any particular areas of focus for next year?
No, I think we discussed a lot of it and referred to it. And we can't, like you said, it has to be realistic in nature, and because we could have a whole list. But as we started from the beginning, at our last meeting prior, when we set up priorities, and we started movement, if we get some movement in any of that, then we have to stick to it. We have to stick to those and keep pushing. So, and I also referred to Member Schneider about her concerns as well in Millbrae and other places, and think that her thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
And yourself. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Member Schneider?
Well, Chair, I love advocacy and that's my background, so I tend to go there right away. But I would say we're going to have a new congressman and a new assemblywoman. And if it should be Diane Pappin served on the roundtable for about a year. I think she came to 2 meetings. I'm not saying that negatively. I'm just saying we have 2 brand new legislators to educate. And then we've got Senator Becker, who is really good at pushing technology and climate change. So I'm always more comfortable if our professional staff give we electeds talking points, but maybe one of our goals could be, what are the things that we need to do at the state level? What are the things we need to do at the federal level? What are the talking points? And and I would assume this probably takes some staff time, but we should probably have meetings with them to bring them up to speed.
Good.
On that. I mean, I've taken Senator Becker to Millbrae and shown him where the runways are relative to the train station and blah, blah, blah. But I think if we had some stated positions, and Brian just brought up this really good thing about schools. I mean, that sounds like a no-brainer, especially, especially if schools have to go through more improvements for safety, meaning active shooter, or any of the other things that they have to do. So I love the school thing on there. I love, of course, looking at Title 21 and anything we might be able to do in California where the FAA isn't stopping it. Again, my field, I'm used to California, we go our own way and we are better than the federal legislation, but it looks like FAA has taken control of that. So, but if we do that, we have those meetings. Let's look at Congresswoman Spears' 8 bills, see if there needs to be any adjustments for 2023. And I know she had some stuff for low frequency, but I'm going blank on the 8 of them. I know one of them was about bringing back curfews. That's the one that really would make all of us happy, but very hard to get. And then I think really to look at the metrics, changing the metrics and changing their, we haven't brought this up in a while, but when the FAA did their annoyance study, they didn't look at the neighborhoods in back of runways or to the sides of runways. So we need to make sure that when they are looking at the impacted neighborhoods, that they are including neighborhoods in back of runways and to the side of runways.
Okay.
And I always count on Darlene to make sure that I'm on point on that one. So, I would also say for us that we make sure that we have that kind of meeting where we can have that give and take with the public members, because a lot of them are more informed than I am. I can't speak for the rest of you, but I count on them on that. And I made an action item for myself to reach out to the main cities that are directly over departures and see if they've got schools. We might want to do a little bit of outreach to the school districts and say, hey, by the way, this is one more thing that could be impacting children, and they've been through enough the last few years. So it seems like a good time to branch out. We might want to bring in the Department of Education. We've got so many school districts in our county. I don't know a quick and easy way to reach them, but at least reach into those that are planning like mine on a school, hopefully a remodel. The school is outdated and too small for the number of kids.
Okay. I appreciate your comments. I will note that some of the suggestions may be more appropriate for the roundtable as a whole than the legislative subcommittee, but we will note them and bring them to the roundtable to Chairman Hindi so that he can then have the benefit of some of these thoughts. But so don't limit your recommendations. We'll try to separate that which is legislative and that which is more global roundtable. Brian Perkins, I see your hand is up.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was just curious because you mentioned that your charge is federal legislation, and yet I'm wondering if that's too narrow a charge, and I don't want to add more work to Kathleen. In fact, if I do, Kathleen will come back at me. But there are interactions. Land use law is certainly a state law, and it seems to me like, at least as a check the box exercise, you might want to consider not restricting yourself to federal legislation. You might want to just formally allow yourself the opportunity to talk about state related matters. And I just want to correct the record. I didn't want to suggest that schools presently can't use their bond money for noise mitigation. I just have no idea. So there's an example of where you might want to check on something and someone might object that you're outside your lane or something like that. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and Brian, I appreciate your comments on the, I've been trying to find anything that actually lists the charter, exactly what the committee charges is. And I don't know if we found anything definitive, and Lisa may know, but my understanding has always been, at least by practice, if not by rule, that we focused on federal. And we've talked about expanding it in the past. Should we include state legislation? Should we include something other than noise? Because by charter, it's supposed to be noise, not pollutants and all the other stuff. That may be a broader discussion for the roundtable as a whole. And we may want to recommend or suggest we have that discussion, but appreciate your comments. I don't disagree with them at all. Are there
Chairman
other
Royce?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Actually, in our original charter, air pollution is included. But then there's a paragraph that goes on to say, well, we think it's all being taken care of by California Air Resources Board. But the reality is CARB does not follow airport issues. So it actually is in our charter.
Okay, well, we'll review that then. It's good to know. I wasn't aware of that, so thank you. With that, are there other members of the staff before I go to public comment? I'd be interested in public comment thoughts on priorities and goals for the legislative subcommittee. Linda or Bert or Lisa, any thoughts you might have?
Mr. Chair, I was
Yes.
just gonna, building off of what's already been said, just say it would be, it might be overwhelming to include state legislation on the agenda for this committee, but I think it's worth kind of talking about what the priorities are vis-a-vis federal versus state. I do think I'm texting with Angela on the side to try to pin down where the original charter for the legislative subcommittee is, because I think I know where to find it. I do think it probably did prioritize federal, but that's not to say that you can't expand the mission or suggest to the roundtable that you do. But I do think one has to prioritize how many sort of things you want to go after.
Yep, that'll be the challenge, but we've got a list here I think makes sense, and maybe we can put some order together on that. So thank you.
Yeah, I
Chairman
concur
Royce?
with Linda on that one.
Okay.
Chairman
Bert,
Royce, sorry, this is
Yeah.
Ann. If it turns out that we need to stay focused on federal,
Mhm.
and but I will tell you, we have a lobbyist to do just this at the state level. And because Title 21 is, I'm going to be really blunt. If nobody is taking responsibility for all of the noise from Caltrain, et cetera, then my city has to fight the cumulative noise impact. So if this committee can't do it, but they know what they'd like to have, give it to me to give to our lobbyist. And we at least have that voice. And we can at least be pushing League of California Cities to do this. And
Yeah.
I would imagine the other cities that have that many freeways close in, that fact that FAA noise metrics become Title 21 metrics is a problem.
Mhm. Good.
Especially if they're not including low frequency noise. And cars give off low frequency noise too.
Good. Thank you. Well, I'm going to close council or membership discussion right now. We only have 5 minutes left and I want to hear from the public. So let's go to public comment. So Angela, we'll turn it over to you for public comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I do see one hand raised from this item, from Ms. Landesman. So, Ms. Landesman?
Thank you. I have a comment on air quality pollutants. I'm so glad that Mayor Schneider brought this up at a recent meeting. You do have it on your charter. It is definitely a matter of national legislation. It does not involve the FAA alone. It involves the EPA. It's a shared responsibility. They're not doing everything that is needed. So that's a really important item. If you're not going to work on it, then you should remove it from your charter, but it's just very important. Just as an idea, for example, there is mitigation for air quality pollutants near the airport. Provided there's a good policy in place, you could be helping families by putting whole house air filters, which are not as expensive as insulation, and certainly for schools and so forth. So if you're really interested in helping the community, this is a really great issue to focus on. I think it's an interesting idea to see what readily available, advocacy could do already with things that are, I wonder, with supplemental metrics and metrics in general, you could be asking the airport yourselves as a roundtable for reports on nighttime and daytime noise, contrasting those. And Bert is the perfect person to ask this for. I spoke with him about it the other day, and he has ideas. He has wonderful knowledge. So I would draw on Bert's expertise to look at doing some assessments of nighttime and daytime noise with the airport, see what's within your power to ask for, because maybe the FAA will never change their metrics or anything, but it is not against the law to use metrics. Minneapolis certainly does that. You can already employ all the metrics that you would want to, especially when you're making proposals to the FAA that involve communities and they cannot understand what you're proposing. So that communication tool needs to expand. And thank you very much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you,
Angela,
Ms.
do we have other
Landesman.
hands raised?
Mr. Chair, we do not have any more hands raised for this item. Thank you.
Okay, we'll close public comment on this. We'll bring it back to the membership. In interest of time, unless there's something critical, I'd like to get to item 6. I think Kathleen, we can summarize what we heard and maybe get out some sort of summary to the membership on this, if possible. So my report to the roundtable is accurate. Okay. Okay, with that, we'll close item number 6. We'll go to the next item on the agenda, or close item 5, excuse me, and move to item number 6. And that's just it's a catch-all category to talk about areas of interest for the membership. And I did want to bring up, as alluded to earlier, the airport noise reports. They are now available to the membership through a special arrangement with the publisher. There are some great articles in it. One I wanted to just draw to your attention, particularly since we had alluded to a study done at the UC Davis Symposium, I think it was Netherlands or Switzerland, that actually changed their nighttime noise metrics, initiated by a study on the impacts on the health impacts of people surrounded by aviation noise. But this new study from the European Society of Cardiology, talking about healthy sleep score in incidental cardiovascular disease and stroke, was pretty interesting. And I think a copy is included in the handout in the agenda. But effectively, this study looks at a number of people in European. I think there was over 7,000 participants over a 10-year time period with an 8-year follow-up. Men and women aged 50 to 75. They were given scores on sleep habits and try to correspond that score to incident of cardiovascular disease. As you might suspect, the less healthy the sleep, and that's a generalization, the higher the incident of cardiovascular disease and stroke. In fact, the study would conclude there's a direct correlation. And they actually made the comment that the risk of coronary heart disease and stroke, and I might remind you, that is still by far the #1 killer of people, both in the US and globally. The number of people dying from cardiovascular disease and stroke outnumbers the next 5 causes by significant numbers. So it is something that from a health perspective, anything we can do to reduce it, we need to do, but more importantly, anything that increases it is cause for great concern. But a decrease of 1 point in the score reduces your chances of cardiovascular heart disease by 22%. And as we learned at one of the studies, that aviation noise is considered the leading cause of noise impacting health. So at any rate, I just want to bring that study to your attention. It's evidence to help support the need for better, quote unquote, safety on the ground. I love that phrase. And I just want to make sure people are aware of it. Are there any comments from the membership with respect to item number 6, items of current interest, for the good of the order?
Just thank you, Chair. Great job. And I can't wait for the roundtable when it's reported out.
Okay. With that, let me just go to, if there are no other comments, this last but not least, public comment on item number 6. Is there any public comment on that? Do we have any hands raised, Angela? If not, we'll close public comment. And we're almost on time here.
Pardon me.
I'm sorry.
No, sorry, pardon me, Chair. I couldn't get through the unmute quick enough, but we do not have any virtual hands raised. Thank you.
We'll close public comment then. Thank you. With that, we're at the adjournment time. I don't want to keep you longer than necessary because I know all of us have busy schedules. And I do want to thank you for a very productive meeting. A lot of great ideas, a lot of great discussions. We'll try to figure out how we can categorize that for the report to the roundtable. And our next meeting, well, I'm not sure when it will be. It will be after the first of the year. And we'll try to do our best for accelerating it. Originally, it was scheduled for the spring, but we'll take into account the recommendations given by members, see if we can't do it earlier than that. Hopefully we can.
But Al,
Yes.
again, you can have half of ground-based noise, because the real solution, you could probably even have more than half of ground-based noise. Kathleen and I haven't talked about it. Consider, let's use that November meeting for this. This is important.
Okay, well,
So why don't we work on that agenda together?
Yeah, we'll talk offline. That's a good suggestion, a great suggestion. So with that, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep safe,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you, sir.